Hello there and welcome to my channel. This is kind of an exciting video for me because we're going to cover the e-ink art market, which is just this brand new thing that's been developing this year in 2025. There's a lot of interesting players, and I'm just going to give kind of a summary and overview about what this is and how it's kind of shaping up. Now let's take a few steps back and let's look at e-ink in general. So we've known e-ink mainly as consumers from e-readers like the Kindle or Kobo's or Pocketbook or even Sony in the beginning years, among others. And then lately, in the last few years, around e-ink note-taking. And that's been predominantly where most of the consumer focus has been with this technology. But simultaneous to those technologies developing, there's been a lot of work that e-ink has done in the commercial space around signage. So, for example, sometimes you'll see bus schedules that are e-ink panels, or maybe you'll go to the supermarket and the labels that show the price of an item, that might be an e-ink label in some cases. So there's been a lot of work that e-ink has done in both the consumer and the commercial space. And what's interesting about where we are now is we're finally seeing some of that technology in the commercial space jump over into the consumer space, specifically around wall art. And that's what this video is about. Okay, so having said that, let's talk a little bit about the different type of e-ink screens, because that explains a little bit about what's new as it relates to this e-ink art. So as we think of consumer products like e-readers and e-note takers, there's kind of three predominant technologies that the e-ink Corporation has utilized in the space. So the first for black and white screens is their Carta technology. And they have different versions of Carta. You'll have like Carta 1300, 1200, and so on. But those are mainly what you see in e-readers and note takers that are black and white. Then there's Kaleido 3. And Kaleido 3 technically is a modification of Carta. So you've got a Carta screen, which is with its black and white bubbles down below, and then there's kind of color filter which sits on top of it. Kaleido 3 right now is the most dominant color technology used in e-readers and in e-note takers. And that's because it's very responsive. It has a lot of benefits to it, but it also has a lot of limitations. It can only represent a little over 4,000 colors, for example. And it does a great job with what it has, but it has these kind of significant limitations in color accuracy in particular, and also a little bit to a lesser extent around pixel density. Then there's a third option, which is just starting to kind of be adopted, which is Gallery 3. And Gallery 3 shifts away from the Carta technology into what they call Advanced Color E-Paper, or ACEP, which is also the technology used in a lot of signage. So with Gallery 3, you've got cyan, magenta, yellow, and white as your primary colors. Those are the little bubbles as opposed to black and white. And that's what moves around to represent the image. And Gallery 3 has the advantage of being able to represent 40 to 60,000 colors, depending on the implementation, and a much higher pixel density. But it comes at the cost of not having quite as good of a refresh rate as we see with Kaleido 3. So we're just starting to see Gallery 3 make some inroads. And right now, the only device you can buy with Gallery 3 is the remarkable Paper Pro. But we do expect to see more this fall and certainly in the years to come. Now with e-ink art, we're talking about another version of that advanced color e-paper known as Spectra 6. And Spectra 6 is a little bit different in that the bubbles are red, blue, yellow, and white. And that can produce a wide range of colors. It's not clear exactly how many colors can be represented. I thought I had read around 60,000 at one point, but in my research for this video, I couldn't quite replicate that, so I'm not sure why that number stuck in my mind. But certainly much more than what we have with Kaleido 3. And it also just does a much better job in general of color accuracy. It's not usable for consumer devices because the refresh takes a long time. It can take up to a minute, for example, to refresh an image. So you couldn't use that in an e-reader or an e-note taker. but you could use it for art. So Spectra 6 is making that leap from signage to consumer goods, and it's perfect for the intention of wall art. So in practical terms, what is so special about Spectra 6, and why might someone consider it as opposed to other options for art in particular? And there's probably quite a few reasons I could list here, but I'm just going to focus on two predominant pros and two predominant cons, which I think kind of summarize most of what one would think about if you were thinking about purchasing one of these devices. So we'll start with the pros. So the biggest pro is that it essentially is wireless. So, we have all sorts of devices now where they can display photos, right? But those are always tethered by a cable. And so there's limited options on where you can put it. Or, even if you have an area where you can put it, you've got this cable running, which could be, a little bit of an eyesore. So what's nice about these Spectra panels is that you can charge them, and that battery could last 6 months, a year. Some are even claiming up to 2 years. It all depends on how often the image is reproduced, what the Wi-Fi connection is. Regardless, it lasts a long time. So now you get the benefits of having an electronic screen, but you don't have to be limited in terms of where you can put that up. And that's huge for art, right? When I think about my home, most of the places that are really good places to mount art are nowhere near an outlet, or if they are close to an outlet, that cable would really look bad. So having that capability of being able to place it basically anywhere in the house is huge. So that would be my first pro. The other pro I would point to is around the fact that it can change. So instead of having an art piece like a print or an oil painting or a watercolor or what have you, static on the wall, you can change that image. And some devices have the ability to do that in a schedule. Some, the change is just manual. But the point is that you can change the image on that art piece at any time that you want. Art really can change a room. It can bring a lot of color. It can bring a lot of vibrancy. I brought one of these devices into my office, and I have other decorative items in the office, but there was this blank wall that I mounted this reflection frame on, and the colors really did change the feel of the room, even though it's just a 13-inch screen. So the ability then to change that further and to go through different images to kind of shake things up really helps liven up a room. It has a significant impact. So I think those are the two strengths of E-Ink art: the fact that you can put it anywhere, and the fact that you can change what you show on the screen. That adds kind of a dynamic nature to the art that you're hanging. But there are significant cons as well. So the first con is the expense. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the video, because a number of folks have commented about that they wouldn't pay, say, $350, which is what it currently costs for 13-inch devices. And they need to see that price go down. I have a different take on that, but I understand that sentiment. And for a lot of people, the price is going to be very prohibitive. So that's one major con. The other thing, and this is particularly true of photographs, is the images just don't look as good as LCD screens. Now, this is actually a pro and a con in and of itself. So when you look at one of these E-Ink screens, you don't think you're looking at an electronic screen, and that's good. It looks more like a piece of art. You're not quite sure how to place it. It's difficult to define it. I think I had one person say, particularly with photographs, it kind of looks like printing on a LaserJet printer of pretty good quality, but not perfect. That is kind of what it's like with most pictures. Now, art is a little bit better. You don't get that sense with art, and I think these frames work much better with art. But with photographs in particular, it's not as good as you're used to on your phone or on these other LCD devices that you might have in your house to display photos. So it's not as good of an experience with photos. It's still pretty good, and photos do vary. It depends on the image itself. But that's, I think, one of the weaknesses. If you're buying one of these devices for photos, you might be a little bit disappointed in the quality, even though I still think it's pretty good. So my predominant cons are the expense of the item and the fact that photos aren't necessarily the best medium or the best image for this type of medium. So that in general is what you would want to consider if you're wanting to buy one of these things. So kind of sum it up, if you're looking for a piece of art and you're focused a little bit less on photographs and more on either classical art pieces, maybe AI generated art pieces, whatever, and you're okay with the expense, then I think that this is something you may want to be interested in. Now, so far, there have been 4 different screen sizes that you can purchase these items in. And I'll talk a little bit about pixel density because that's one of the factors which does impact the display. And you can see here there is a range of pixel density depending on the screen size. Most of them kind of hover between the 130 to 150 range in PPI, and indeed the one that I've reviewed is at the top there at 150, which is the reflection frame, and that's why I highlighted that row in green, having the best pixel density. Now with that device, I found with a lot of art pieces in particular, they look great. You have to really get in close. You never see the pixels, but you do see a little bit of a breakdown of the image if you're fairly up close. If you're a yard or more out, you're not going to see that at all. You might see other effects with photographs at further out, but art in particular holds up really well. So I think the 150, and I don't think 130 really would be that appreciably different, although I haven't yet reviewed a device of that size to this point. But that's generally the range of pixel density, and I think it works. I am a little concerned of the pixel density of the 31.5-inch screen, and so far it's only Eink Poster that will be offering this size. That's a much lower pixel density, and I have to wonder if that's going to be impacting the image. Having said that, you'll note when you go to the Eink Poster site that they focus on that as kind of a poster size. It's kind of shaped like a poster. It's not the same dimensions as the others in terms of length and width. And posters, I think, probably would look fine on that PPI. So if that is your focus, you're probably not going to be as concerned. But again, with photographs especially, but even with art pieces, the 91 or 93 rather PPI might be a little too low. So it's something to think about and be aware of. Okay, so let's start to talk about the marketplace itself. So how are things kind of coming together? And it's pretty interesting. We've got 4 players, and they all have aspects of their device which differentiate from each other. And remember that all these companies are going to be using the same screens. They'll have their different sizes in some cases, but all those screens are coming from the E Ink Corporation. So it's how they design their particular framing and their mats and their apps that will distinguish themselves from each other. And again, you'll see they're all kind of carving a slightly different piece of the market. So it's very interesting to see this play out. I do expect there to be more players in the future, particularly at the lower end, I would imagine. But we'll just have to see how that plays out in the short run as we're introducing this new art market. There's 4 people to consider. And here's a grid that shows basically their general pricing now and the different sizes that they're currently offering. Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind is that, particularly with Aluratek and with the Blooming 8, both of those companies are currently conducting campaigns. The Aluratek is conducting a campaign on Kickstarter, and the Blooming 8 had done a Kickstarter campaign. That's closed, but they have a live Indiegogo campaign as of this filming, and we're in the middle of July right now. So those prices are going to be lower than what you see on the table. So in theory, this is the pricing that will take place for each company when they're post their campaigns. And in fact, Aluratek, you can actually go buy it now for that $350 price indicated on the table. Now, I've highlighted some of the prices, and the reason why is those are all the ones that I have already purchased or pledged and intend to do a review on. So as you can see, I'm going to be covering all companies and almost all different sizes. So I'm not covering everything, but I am going to cover this market extensively. So that's a good reason to subscribe if you want to follow these companies and look at my reviews for their art pieces. This is definitely going to be covered on this channel as evidenced by this table. Okay, so now let's show a couple tables to kind of highlight how these companies are being positioned differently. And I put them again in order of cost, least expensive on the left and most expensive on the right. And basically you can see, most of them run off Wi-Fi, but the reflection frame is NFC, so that's a unique characteristic that they have. Blooming 8 has the ability to have an SD card. It doesn't appear like the others have that. Blooming 8 also has the ability to change the frame. That's unique for them. But with Aluratek and with reflection frame, you can change the mats, and both actually ship with 2 different mats. So that's kind of a general idea of how these companies differ. Then if you look a little bit further into their app, then all of them allow you to upload your own images. Some are more geared toward uploading photographs. So you can always upload other images as well, but they'll bring up your photo library first, and you have to dig a little bit in order to get into your images that are not photographs. Other companies do a little bit of a better job of being able to upload, images that are not necessarily photos. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of each of the companies. They all allow it, but some are a little bit easier than others, and all of them have easy load of photos. So that's pretty much straightforward. Then in terms of images actually that you can pick from the apps themselves, Aluratek has none. So basically it's just whatever you upload is what you can display. Reflection Frame has a pretty good selection, and we'll take a look at all these apps, by the way, a little later on in this video to give you a sense of it. But Reflection Frame has examples of photographs, of AI-generated art. You can't generate the art, but they have curated AI art pieces, as well as classical art too. So that's all available in the app. So you can either upload your images, or you can go ahead and pick from their catalog, and the catalog seems to be growing as time goes on. Then you have Blooming 8, and Blooming 8 takes a really interesting tact in that they allow you, of course, to upload images, and they also have their own gallery that's starting to kind of take shape. But their main differentiator is that you have in the app the ability to interact with a chatbot, but actually it's really just meant to type in your query, and then they'll produce an image and actually some text, oddly enough, as well. And then you can then load those images onto the device. So Blooming 8 is the only one that uses the AI functionality to translate your query into an image, which you could then upload. And then finally you have Eink Poster. And Eink Poster, we're still learning. They haven't shown what their catalog is yet. Well, they certainly touch on it on their website. And their focus is about having curated art pieces. Think of them more as kind of a high art, for lack of a better phrase. And some of those pieces may be available with a purchase of the device. Others might be available with subscription. We're not quite clear on that yet. But they're much more into the classical art pieces and things like that, and having that selection for your device. You can still do photos on the Eink Poster as well, but their focus clearly is more on curated art. Okay, so I took some notes, and I want to go over some of the kind of details that also help differentiate these companies from each other. So building off of that table that we just went over, here are how these companies are differentiating themselves. And we'll start with Aluratek. So Aluratek, as noted earlier, has changeable mats. So they come with a white and a black mat, so 2 neutral colors that you could swap out, and that comes with the device. The device also comes with an acrylic stand. So they're the only one that I'm aware of that does that. So in addition to mounting on a wall, which all these devices are designed to do, they all have brackets, both in portrait or landscape, Aluratek allows you to use this acrylic stand to then put something on a desk or on a shelf or what have you. So that's one differentiator that they have. They can store up to 10 photos on the device. It has that storage capability. And there are buttons on the side of the device that once you've stored those images, you can just click on those buttons and change your images accordingly. And the app will eventually allow for scheduling so those can change automatically. So those are kind of the key features that differentiate Aluratek. Reflection Frame has changeable mats, but their colors are white and kind of a moss green. So they went with a slightly different color scheme there. In addition to that, as noted earlier, they have a pretty nice curated gallery within their app that Aluratek doesn't have. And we'll get to just a second talking a little bit more about that particular market dynamic between those two companies, since they're priced right at the same level. But moving on to Blooming 8, Blooming 8 is probably the most feature-packed of them. They're the ones that have the most Kickstarter-friendly of all the devices, in that they've offered things like smart home integration, the ability to change the frames and use IKEA frames instead, the ability to have integration in calendar, weather, and to-dos, although we're not quite clear what that looks like yet, and even voice commands. So there's a lot of bells and whistles in addition to the AI generation from the app coming with the Blooming 8. They're the most intriguing of all of the device manufacturers because they're doing so much, and we're not clear how this stuff will come together. So I'm very interested to review that particular device. And finally, you have Eink Poster. And Eink Poster, you can actually use the app to change multiple devices at the same time. They have, as we noted earlier, their curated gallery, and they might have subscriptions, but we're just not clear on what that looks like going forward, but clearly playing at the high end of the marketplace. So very distinct between Aluratek and Reflection Frame, kind of at the lower end, at least in terms of price point, not necessarily quality, but the lower end in terms of price point. Blooming 8 in the middle, with all their features and their AI integration. And then on the top end, in terms of price, Eink Poster with a much more art focus. So while we have Eink Poster taking a very distinct part of the market, and the same can be said of Blooming 8, we do have this dynamic where Aluratek and Reflection Frame really are going against each other. And the big differences between those two is, of course, that the Aluratek is Wi-Fi based, where the Reflection Frame uses NFC technology. One is not better than the other. It depends on your circumstances. So, for example, in my circumstance, at home, a Wi-Fi frame makes total sense. I have great Wi-Fi coverage. That's a nice way to be able to change images, and that works great in my house. But in my workplace, I'm not supposed to put personal items onto our work Wi-Fi network. Yes, I could do a hotspot, but it's much easier to work with NFC. So that's just an example of how, just depending on your particular situation, one might be better than the other. I tend, on paper, to favor the Reflection Frame because I really like their curated library of images. There's a number of images there that I've used and I think look really good. And Aluratek just doesn't provide anything. You have to upload those images there. So I think that is an advantage. I haven't reviewed the Aluratek yet, but it's possible that the Aluratek might be better in terms of their mats. First off, I think having a white and black option is probably better than what Reflection Frame decided to do with the white and moss green. I think black just is a much more neutral color that will work well with other items. For example, a black and white photo would look great with a black mat. Also, one of the problems with Reflection Frame was that, at least on my version, the mats kind of curved up slightly. I could really notice it on the white mat, not as much on the green, but both had a little bit of a curve. Somehow, probably the way it was packaged is what caused that. And so it'll be interesting to see if Aluratek can take advantage of that by having a nice flat mat. Now, this isn't a huge deal. I don't think that should dissuade you from not taking the Reflection Frame, but it is an area where Aluratek might have a little bit of advantage. And of course, they have that acrylic stand. So those are just kind of some of the things that differentiate those two companies. So I wanted to show off some of the apps to give you a sense of how these apps will look and perform, but I am in a somewhat limited capacity in that the only device I currently own is the Reflection Frame. So some of the other apps don't really go into their functionality until you connect to a device. Of course, when I do the reviews on each of these devices, we'll look much more deeply into the applications, but I thought we'd still take a look anyway and just get a sense of how these differ. So we'll start with the Aluratek E-Frame. So let's go ahead and click on that. And it's pretty straightforward. You click plus here, or you click on frames, and it asks to connect. So you don't really see any of the other functionality for example, the scheduling on this app at this time. So not a lot to see here, but that is the app that you'll eventually download. By the way, I'm demonstrating these applications on the iPad Pro, but these are also available on the Android system as well. Let's go ahead and go into Reflection Frame next. And this one, you can actually get a better sense of what's available. So here we are in the app. It's a fairly straightforward app. It's also a simple one, but we're inside their library. So they have their own selection of arts, AI, photographs, and they have also a category under Japan as well. So if we just click on each of those, it is a little bit slow to refresh, but if we could scroll through, and I went into a little bit more detail, of course, when we did the review on the reflection frame. So that's in the description, so be sure to check that out. But you keep swiping. There is a search functionality in the app, so if you knew what was in the image, you might be able to look a little quicker that way. But here are some other art pieces, some portraits, and so on. If we go back to the library, we can go to AI. So these are AI generated images. So there's an artist behind it doing the query and doing the refinement of the image, but the image itself is created by AI ultimately. And here are some examples of those. There's actually a few in here that I actually quite like. I really like that one, for example. And just a little more wildlife here. Let's let a few more images load. There we go. And so on. Okay. And then you can load up your own photos, anything that you've loaded up previously. If you click on this icon, it'll be there. So any of items from the library, including things that you upload yourself, will be in the My Photos tab for easy reference. You don't have to go through. Anytime you actually sync the device and load it, it'll give you an alert. So there's no notifications on this one because I usually use my phone, not the iPad, but that's where that would be. So pretty straightforward application, not hard at all. You pick an image, you click it, and then if you are connected to your frame, then you would tap, and I don't have NFC on this device, but basically if your NFC was on your phone, you click it, and then you just tap, and then you can remove it. Once you make a connection with the frame, if you're within 20 feet, then it is fine, and it'll go ahead and load the image, so you don't have to hold it up to the frame. Just hold it up to make that connection. So that's that. I'm going to just jump ahead of Blooming 8 for a second. We're going to focus on Ink Poster, because this is another application that really we don't have much. We don't see the functionality here because we need to connect to an Ink Poster, either through this plus or this button here. And without that connection, we don't see what the rest of the app can do yet. So Ink Poster is not clear how this app's going to work, so that's a bit of a mystery. But we do know how the Blooming 8 app works because there's a ton of functionality here. And this one's nice because it's going to cover the entire screen. But basically, you've got a couple buttons down here at the bottom. The first is their curated art. They have what they call public domain art and collaborative artists. And we'll go ahead and let these load, and you can scroll through. So they have kind of an interesting mix of design choices here. Like so. And if we go over here to the collaborative artist, then you see more, I think, AI art type images. Like so. So kind of an interesting, not a huge gallery, but definitely an interesting one. Then if you go to the next button over, and it reads album, if you click on that, any images that you've either uploaded or generated or used will be in here. So all of these here I've generated. So this one, for example, I wanted to create kind of an old world type map of a fictional land. So that's the query I used, and it created that. They also give you a little bit of a text description, I guess, just for fun. This, as far as I know, doesn't appear if you load the image, but we'll see when I review the device later in the year. But you can, here's a castle, a sand castle that I wanted between two rivers. So there's an example of that. Here I put, a cat in a suit just for fun. All this was generated by the AI. Here's one I really like. This is a castle that's being sieged. I thought that was kind of cool. Here's one. I just did this to see if they would do licensed characters. They do, so that's interesting there. There's an image that I loaded myself and didn't alter at all. Here's an image that I loaded and then asked them incorporate it as part of a query. So I basically had an image that looked similar to this, and then did some sort of query, I think, to turn it into a little more steampunkish, and that's what they came up with, which is okay. And so that's kind of an example. And what's fun about this is you can play with this now, right? So if I click on this Blooming 8 logo, I can either upload my images there, or I can do an AI creation. And this is where I could load my own images, or just simply type in a query. So we'll just type in a query now. Let's just say cats on a horse racetrack, and see what that gives us. Obviously, the more detailed my query, the better it will be, but this is just for fun. So let's see what it comes up with. And this is free, by the way. There's no subscription, so you can generate images now. I don't know if there's a limitation on how many that you can do. I haven't run into any limitation, but there might be. Whisker Derby, I like that as the title. Let's see what the image comes up with. Oh, pretty cool. So that's just an example of what that looks like. And this is where you would connect with devices. Again, I don't have any devices connected because they haven't been released yet. But so really interesting app that you can interact with the Blooming 8. So right now, this is what's out. These apps, of course, will update. A number of them will have scheduling features. I know the Aluratek will have it. I'm pretty sure the Blooming 8 will have it. I believe Ink Poster will have it as well. So there's additional functionality that I can't show off now because it's either not there or you have to connect a frame in order to see it. But hopefully that just gives a quick overview of what these apps are currently like. All right, so we've covered, what the e-ink art market is, the broad strokes, as well as the different players. What are my overall thoughts? And I'll just kind of throw some stuff out a little bit randomly, I suppose. We'll start with pricing. So when I did my review of the Reflection Frame, and that's the only device I've reviewed so far, I'll be reviewing a lot more as the months go on, but the feedback that I got on that video, probably the most predominant comment is that these devices are too expensive. And remember, I'm reviewing the lower end device, again, in terms of price. I have a much different take on that. I think that the value of art is pretty incredible if done right. And I see it as, the ability to be able to change images and to hang anywhere. I think that the packaging justifies the price. I even am willing to consider the e-ink poster, the most expensive iteration, to be potentially worth it. Now we'll see in the review if I still believe that's the case. But nevertheless, most people, I think, are going to be balking at these price points, and there's no right or wrong answer here. I went to a Burlington Coat Factory store recently, and I'd never gone to one. It's similar to a Ross, and for people that don't know, it's basically a budget store where most of the interior is for clothing, and then on the exterior you have other kind of home good items. You might have a little bit of toys, you might have a little bit of gardening supplies, and then you've got other home things. And so you can get art at these places. And these art pieces run, $20. Now, they're all completely forgettable in my mind, but it just shows that you could, if you wanted to, go out and buy something for almost next to nothing. I remember when I was first, moved out and was, going to my own places, my own apartments or whatever, and I wanted to get some art for the walls just to make it, not look so, open and bland. And I remember going and getting prints for fairly cheap and getting frames at cost plus, and those were fairly cheap. So you can, if you're selective and you put the effort in, yeah, you can find art that's quite cheap. So I can understand where people come from when they balk at the price. I definitely get that angle. But for me, I think that if these devices deliver on the promises that they've been making, I think the impact will be worth it. And I have pieces of art, not a lot, but a few that are fairly expensive. I have, for example, a really nice, vibrant photograph on a metal frame in a fairly large size. That was quite expensive. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I think it was over $1,000. And then I've gone into art galleries and I've seen pieces I really liked, but I've looked at the price and thought, there's just no way I can afford this. So people definitely will spend a lot of money on art. And the question just becomes, do these devices ultimately end up justifying the price? And my current stand is I think they can for a lot of people. And I've been happy with what I've seen so far. But for a lot of other people, it's just never going to be worth it. And the one thing I think that these companies should definitely not do is try to chase these people that are saying $350 is too much. And this is not a commentary on those people, by the way. What I'm actually saying is it's a race to the bottom, and you're not going to be able to sell your product at a price point that satisfies that part of the market. So it's smart. Ink Poster, I think, I'm really fascinated to see what they do, because I think they're taking the smartest and riskiest take, which is to try to go at the premium part of the market and to sell to people that otherwise would not consider an e-ink device, or if they would, it would be coincidental. These are people that are looking for art and they're looking for pieces that would change a room, and that potential is there. So it's going to be fascinating to see, can e-ink at the top level justify itself at these really high price points? We'll find out as we do these reviews, but it's definitely something. There's a lot of people out there that are going to be price sensitive, and I think will never be the intended audience for these devices. Another interesting aspect is this going to take off, in general? And one kind of intriguing clue, and I don't really know what this means ultimately, is there have been a number of Kickstarter and Indiegogo campaigns. So Blooming 8 did one of each, and Aluratek is doing a Kickstarter campaign currently. Now, what's intriguing about this is the Blooming 8 has been very successful. Their Kickstarter campaign ended successfully, and their Indiegogo campaign seems to be going fairly strong as well. So that's going really well and showing a strong interest. Aluratek is very different. They only have a handful of people who have pledged at this time, and it's not clear that they're going to be able to get enough people interested by the end of their campaign. So that campaign may not conclude successfully. So you have these two examples that are very different from each other in terms of their impact. And this could mean one of two things. It could mean that the Blooming 8 simply is a much better campaign. And indeed, they have much more sizes available. They have a lot of features they're throwing out there. As I noted earlier, it's a very friendly Kickstarter, Indiegogo type of a product, where the Aluratek is much simpler. So that could simply be the differentiator there. But it could also be that the Blooming 8, both campaigns predated the Aluratek campaign, and it could be that there's a saturation which shows a limitation of where this market could go. It's not clear which of those is relevant, and won't learn that until we see how these sales start to happen when these devices start to come out. But two interesting kind of clues as to what we might be able to expect in the second half of the year as these companies start to actually come to market with their products. It's going to be interesting. Another general observation, and I've kind of hinted at this or touched on this earlier in the video, is that I'm not sure this technology is going to take off with photographs being the central focus for the consumer. I think the art is where this really, the technology just excels and looks amazing. And photographs, as I mentioned, can look good. It really does depend on the image. But photographs are also prone to showing some of the limitations of the screen. So, companies like Aluratek in particular that focus so heavily on, uploading your photographs, I wonder about their positioning in the market. I wonder how much that's going to take off. And again, going back to the price conversation we had just a few moments ago, LCD screens are super cheap. And I think going the photographic route is kind of going to the race to the bottom route. And I just wonder if that's the right strategy for these companies. I think reflection frame is really smart. Yes, they do feature the fact that you can put photographs, but having that curated gallery for art pieces, I think is a big deal and will serve them well. So I kind of like how reflection frame is positioned more because of that. And I think companies like Blooming 8 and Ink Poster that really are focusing much more on the art piece, whether it's classical art or AI art, are doing a much smarter positioning of their product, because I think that's where the strength of the Spectra 6 panel is. I think the more people that come into this with the specific focus of displaying photos will tend to be a little more disappointed with the experience than would otherwise be the case. So I kind of predict and wonder if the lower end of the market might start to kind of dry out. You might see like a lot of players come in because it is the easier part of the market to enter, but I think you're going to see a lot of players go out because ultimately it doesn't play to the tech's strengths, even though it does have the lowest price point among the players so far. So that's kind of my take, at least, on photographs and this technology. I think that it's not going to fare nearly as well as the art size will. So overall, I'm just really excited about the technology. I really loved the reflection frame, which I've already reviewed. And I'm looking forward to reviewing items from Ink Poster, from Blooming 8, even Aluratek. I'm very intrigued to see how their packaging comes together, and am open-minded in terms of what I ultimately think about their product. And hopefully some of these companies will end up surprising me along the way. Art can really change a room. It just has an amazing ability to take a room that maybe is a little bit bland and add just a nice level of color and just a little bit more dimension to a room. I'm a huge believer of that. And I'm really excited about how these Spectra 6 panels can play a role in not only achieving that result, which I currently do with art pieces around my house now, but by able to changing images over time be a much more dynamic experience to really take art to a new level in a sense. These devices are amazing and they're very low maintenance, just like art. You just have to dust them off. Yes, you're going to have to charge them every once in a while, but that's going to be a really small thing given how long these batteries will last. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity here for these devices to be successful, and I'm really excited to be reviewing them as they come out. Aluratek should be coming out fairly soon, as well as Ink Poster. I expect some potential delays, so it may be into August or later that these devices come out, but it's not that far away. And then Blooming 8, I believe, is going to start distributing some of their products in October, but of course, with all Kickstarter and Indiegogo campaigns, that could be delayed by a month or two. But I definitely think before the end of the year, I'll have been able to review products, at least one size from each of these companies. And I hope to see you in my channel as we go through the review process. One last thing, all these devices that I'll be reviewing, I will be purchasing with my own money. So I don't have any communication with these companies or any relationship with them. So I'm just an impartial observer, rooting for them all, really. Rooting for them as individual companies or rooting for the space. But I will do my best to give objective reviews about how I feel about the tech. My bias is simply, I'm kind of excited about it going in, and you'll just have to adjust based knowing that in advance. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. Hopefully I painted a really good picture about what this whole market is about, where the excitement comes from, and how the different players are competing in this space in a very short period of time. This has become a very interesting and dynamic market, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this develops. I think I've said multiple times now, and hopefully I'll see you there and you'll be with me on the journey. So thank you very much, and I hope you guys have a great day.